Hey everybody, Dr. M. Holt again. So a couple months, 6 months ago or so, I was out waiting for one of my kids and reading a book, and somebody looked at me really funny, and I kind of talked to him for a few minutes, and they said, "How can you read? It's such a waste of time." And I started thinking about that. I'm like, who says that to somebody you don't know? But one of the things I always found was that in times in my life when I've been an avid reader, I was far more creative in my day job. And I'm not an artist. I'm a scientist. I get paid mostly as an engineer, but I do some writing. But the primary part of my career is engineering, and engineers tend to be have to be fairly creative people, or they do what I call turn the crank engineering, where somebody gives you a list and says, "I want you to build something that does this and this and this and this. Here's how I want you to build it. Go," and somebody else does the creative part. And the most creative engineers, I think, are those that are going to survive sort of the AI purge that's going to hit a lot of industries. So I started looking at a couple of things because I have kids getting ready to go off to college. And what's the common factor in more creative people? And one of the more things I've noticed is that creative people have a tendency to do creative things in their off time. Makes sense. The brain's a muscle. You're going to have to go off and exercise that muscle. So I read a bunch of psychological papers because, what else does a physicist do besides read academic papers? We do a lot more than that. I was joking about that. But so I went off and did some research, and what I found was uh, psychologists, psychiatrists, brain researchers have looked at it and have figured out that if you look at art, if you create things, if you work on art, or if you read, write, um, do other creative types of things, it excites the brain in different ways than exercise. However, reading about jogging and jogging actually excite the same part of the brain, which I found really interesting. It doesn't really help your body, but it does excite the same part of the brain. So you get that endorphin rush that everybody looks for. You get it a little slower, you get it a little differently, but you get it. But the other interesting thing that I found was people who read fiction are always exercising that creative part of their brain, and they also are known to learn empathy much better than other people. I think we can all agree societally we could use more of that. So I did a little more research and a little more looking at some of the books that I've really enjoyed over the years, and I found some common threads. So we're going to take a quick look at one of the series that really kind of got me into reading in the first place. A series called Dragonlance. Now, I started reading these when there were only two on the market. Dragons of Autumn Twilight, Dragons of Winter Night. I had to wait for Dragons of Spring Dawning. It was an interminable wait because it was like 3 months. I was a teenager. I had no patience. But one of the things that I found, and one of the things that attracted it to me was the cover art. And the cover art, I feel, tells you kind of a lot about the story. Not, it doesn't give anything away, but it says, okay, I've got three adventurers. There's a dragon sneaking up behind them. These three are obviously with each other. They're obviously friends. They obviously know each other. And they're obviously determined. So, okay, now I've got a whole bunch of stuff about the story just kind of right off the bat. And it does it in this really kind of cool way. And that, by the way, that painting is by Larry Elmore, and it wound up on the front cover of the book. That is my copy of the book. It's I don't think it's not my original one. It's what I've always loaned them out, and of course some of them you don't get back. But I do still have one with the original cover art laying around. Um, but I found this one kind of interesting because this one really the Dragonlance stories and in some cases Forgotten Realms, but not really to the same extent as the early Dragonlance stories, merged art and story so well that I think that's what attracted me to the entire series. And hear me out. Looking at paintings, looking at art, and reading a story excite different parts of your brain. When you excite parts of the brain, you get an endorphin rush that we all enjoy. Um, but it impacts you differently. So the art and the story were both really good. Is the best art out there? No, well, it's fantastic fantasy art. Is it the number one best fantasy story ever written? No, but it merged art and story so well that I think if you look at those two things put together, I don't think you find a better example than the first two Dragonlance trilogies. And it all kicked off with Dragons of Autumn Twilight. And I think that's what really pulled me into it because, I was 13 when these came out, 14 maybe. And I was in between trying to figure out, did I want to go chase girls? Did I want to read? What do you want to do? Right. So it really did pull me into that reading part more and more. And since then I've become a very avid reader. And if you follow my channel at all, I've got thousands of books, at least 1,000 books laying around. My kids have quizzed me, have you read them all? And well, yeah, because I'm old and I read all the time. Um, but let's dive in a little bit. So this book has been around for a long time, so it's gone through some cover art iterations, but you'll notice in each one of them, you kind of get that same feeling of, companionship. You get that same feeling of people working together. You get that same feeling of a team. This one, I think, in the center does some pretty good, pays pretty good homage to the original Larry Elmore art, because you still have the dragon in the background. This one, um, it shows. I think that's the end of the last home. I think that's what they're going for, but it doesn't have a dragon, which, okay, unless I'm missing one someplace, it's not there, but that's okay. It is what it is. But the thing about changing the cover art, and some people have criticized them for this. I said, well, the original was so good. That's true, but audiences change. And what my kids look at and go, ooh, I want to read that, is not the same thing as I would have looked at, when I was a teenager, and now I'm 52, right? So audiences change over time. And the books have tried to keep up with that. And I get that. But the cover art is not the only part of these books that I think help kind of boost the story, because every book has cover art. Every book, whether it's this one laying on my desk or something else, they all have cover art. But these books, the first six at least, and sometimes beyond, had interior art as well. And the interior art, to somebody who's an artist, which I am not, the artist would look at this and go, "Oh, that's easy, right? That's not hard to do." It isn't. Yeah, maybe for a skilled artist, but it's possible for me. But what the art on the inside of the book did was kind of give you a little hint at each chapter of what's coming up, of what can you expect. And this was the book itself is divided into sort of three sub books. And each time you go from book one to book two to book three, you have this sort of book plate in the front that gives you something about what's going on. And obviously, this one involves dragons. And this one kind of, you're getting sucked into the story. It's like, well, okay, we're going to have a return to the inn. So there's some kind of homecoming going on, right? And as you dig through that story, you find out that there is some kind of a return going on here. Well, there's some kind of hazard going on. You got this guy, this mean looking guy with a giant sword, and it kind of gives you a hint of what's going on in that chapter. And in that chapter, there was a big fight. Chapter two, there was we find out about an oath that was broken, and we found out about the home that all of our traveling companions came from. And chapter three, there's obviously a fire and some music, and maybe a little homecoming going on. And sure enough, in the chapter there was, but the chapter art gave you the hint of coming attractions. It's like a little preview. But it did it so well, it kind of, as a teenager, just sucked me in to that story. And I think 1+1 in this case equaled a lot more than two, right? So they're very synergistic with each other. And if you go forward to the end of the book, and these are the last three chapters in the book, you get a different feel from the chapter art, almost like chapter 14 with the dragon that's either asleep or in pain or healing or something, because you can see there's little holes in the dragon's wings, and obviously exhausted, so it's ready to just sit down and call it a day. There's two pieces of headgear, a wizard's hat and a dragon piece of armor, without anybody wearing it. So you get this sense of loss. You get this sort of sense of ending. And those two things those things are definitely in the story. But I think merging the art and the story is what made these books so successful. And the other thing that did was it really kind of excites your brain and makes you want to kind of get to the next chapter and see what's going on. And that chapter art makes you go, oh my God, I want to read this chapter and see what's going on. Right. So it really does kind of pull you in. And chapter art is, I think, something I'd really like to see more books do. I don't think it's going to happen in the modern printing. I'm not sure I could pull it off with my books, but maybe on the next one we'll see. But to me, in this case, 1+1 equals sort of more than two, because they work so well together. But the other thing they did was, remember, looking at this art and reading the book, it just excites different parts of your brain, and the brain is a muscle, and if you don't use it, it decays, right? So you do have to use it, and this is a great way to kind of keep it kind of doing something besides work and just watching TV, where somebody else kind of feeds you that interpretation of the story. Because as you read, you get a little bit different parts of your brain are excited versus that of just watching TV. And it's a much larger part of your brain that gets excited versus the television side. So I will be going through some more of these books. I've read the first 19 of them at least, and sporadically throughout the rest of the series. There's like 200 plus Dragonlance books out there. I'm sure I'll read more of them at some point. I took a break to go read some other stuff, but I read 19 of them in a row, so I needed a break from fantasy to do something else. But stay tuned to the channel. Check around. There's things on role playing games which are also very creative. There's things on other books that I've read, kind of discussing them, and especially some of the older books I've read that people might say, "Oh, this one's got a problem, that one's got a problem." I get into some in-depth discussions on them. But feel free to comment, like, follow, subscribe, whatever channel you see me on. And if you got a book you want to discuss, let me know. If I've read it, maybe you can come on and we'll discuss it together. Everybody have a great rest of your day. And if you find any more examples of books that merge art and story so well together, please let me know. I always love that kind of thing.